Good afternoon, and I'm wishing everyone a warm welcome from Ollie to all of you for joining and participating in the 2022 Irving Goodman Annual Lecture Series, which we affectionately say as iGals. To those of you who do not know me, I am Stan Cohen, current chair of the iGals committee. And before I forget, I want to especially thank the members of the committee who assist our director, Jacina Hazlitt, in the creation of each year's program. They are Linda Yoder from Ollie, plus Barry Edelstein and Julie Patrick, both from the WVU Psychology Department. And let me give you just a tad history about this series. It began in 2007 and was inspired by Dr. Irving Goodman, who was in the psychology department, who became very active in Ollie after his retirement. Avi, as he was known by most of us, worked tirelessly as Ollie president and was instrumental in obtaining our $1 million grant from the Osher Foundation and facilitated our transition when we were known as all Appalachian Lifelong Learners that started in 1993 to Ollie, which is the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, and that began in 2007. That same year, Avi encouraged the Morgantown City Council to declare the Year of Lifelong Learning and organized, as part of that, the first iGals lecture on aging and creativity presented by Dr. Gene Cohen, no relation, an investigator at the NIH National Institute on Aging. Developing the series, Avi's goal was to expand on our local classes by bringing in experts who would talk about current and emerging issues in the field of gerontology and aging. After his passing in 2012, the Ollie board recognized his dedicated service by naming the series in his honor. So now I would now turn the Zoom camera over to Dr. Hazlitt, Jacina Hazlitt, who will introduce today's speaker, Dr. Susan McFadden. And this is the annual lecture with the title, Living Well with Dementia, It Takes a Community. Thank you, and go ahead, Jacina.
Thank you, Stan. So this afternoon, I just want to say a big thank you to Dr. McFadden for joining us. Dr. Susan McFadden is a retired professor of psychology, having taught at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh for nearly 3 decades. She is a fellow of the Gerontological Society of America and the American Psychological Association. Dr. McFadden is widely respected for her work in religion and spirituality, as well as her work in dementia care. In addition to the importance of her own work, Dr. McFadden is a generous colleague and mentor to many scholars in the field. In retirement, she continues to give to others. For example, in 2011, she helped to establish the Fox Valley Memory Project, and a memory cafes that provides stigma-free social connection for people with dementia and their care partners. It is this line of research in dementia care that Dr. McFadden will speak on today. And before I turn it over, I just remind everybody to please remain muted if you do not have a question. That way we don't hear cell phones going off or somebody knocking at your door. And Dr. McFadden, how would you prefer would you prefer everybody to hold questions till the end, or put them in chat, or?
Yeah, if they put them in chat, then maybe you can summarize them at the end.
I can do that.
I'll plan to stop talking. You know, I'm a professor, so I could talk for a long time, but I will plan to stop about 1:45 your time, and then that will allow for questions.
That sounds great. Wonderful. Well, thank you. It's all yours.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, and we're gonna do that. Okay, so you can all see that now.
Did you choose desktop? Are you positive you chose desktop?
Not yet. Stop share.
Sorry about that. Wanted to make sure we got it right.
So I wanted to share my screen. I'm not desktop.
Yes.
All right. There we go.
Fantastic.
Okay, but now we need to get there. Okay, is that okay?
Yes, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. We need our tech people. So I am very, very happy to be here with you today. I wish I was there in person. I was saying a little bit earlier that West Virginia has a special place in my heart because I grew up in Pittsburgh, and every summer we would drive to visit my grandmother in Northwest Ohio, and we would drive through beautiful West Virginia. And so I knew West Virginia from the time I was very young. Also, I have tremendous respect for West Virginia University, especially because of the outstanding gerontologists who have been educated at your university. And I've had the honor of sending a few students to West Virginia to do their graduate programs. So it's very, very special for me to be here with you today. You might wonder about my title of my talk, Living Well with Dementia, because very often we have such a doom and gloom vision of dementia. I know that there is tremendous suffering that comes with dementia, both for the person who has the condition and the care partner. But I also believe, and I have experienced very many times, that you can live well or as well as possible when you have community support. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. I put my email address up there so that I welcome you to be in touch with me if you have questions or you want me to go a little deeper into anything I say today. And I also put the logo of Fox Valley Memory Project up with the website address. And I urge you to poke around our website because I think you'll find a lot of inspiration there for what we do up here in Northeast Wisconsin, which is where I am. So I'm going to show you an outline of what I'd like to talk about today, just to get us all on the same page, a brief review about what dementia is. And then that old story about doom and gloom, just briefly talk about the fear and stigma associated with dementia, but then move quickly on to a new story that I believe we need to tell about community support for living well with dementia. And I'm going to give 3 types of examples, and I'm calling them aspirational because I'm going to show you 2 short videos, one from England and one from Australia, that have been inspirational to me, but they are programs that, as you will see, are probably pretty expensive, and we don't have that kind of funding up here in Northeast Wisconsin. But there are very important elements of these programs that we have taken to heart here in Northeast Wisconsin, and I think you can do that in West Virginia. So they are aspirational. So to start, dementia is a progressive, quote, decline in mental ability severe enough to interfere with daily life. Pretty straightforward definition. The important point here is that it is progressive and that the condition of an individual early on in the dementia journey will be different from how it looks later on. And of course, everybody is different in terms of their experience of this condition. I'll say more about that later. This term dementia is changing, and this next slide illustrates that. There are many different types of dementia. So we sometimes talk about the dementias, adding a plural S to it. But now, as of 2013 and the publication of the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association, otherwise known as the DSM, We now are talking more about neurocognitive disorders. So it's a fancy new term for dementia, and they are categorized as being either mild or major. Now I'm about to show you a pretty messy slide that illustrates all the neurocognitive disorders that are described in the DSM-5. So this slide gives this list, and I'd be glad to talk about any of them in more detail, but what I want you to see is that there's a big fat purple arrow next to Alzheimer's, because that is the most common type of neurocognitive disorder or dementia. I say Alzheimer's diseases because in coming years, we are going to be differentiating subtypes. We're already starting to do that. And I think that's going to happen even more. You'll notice that I also have this term mixed types here, which means that you can have more than one type. Most often, it's these first two of a vascular disease, which means that you've had a series of small strokes that accumulate damage to the brain, and that is combined with Alzheimer's. So you can see that it's a complex picture we're painting here, but I really just want to talk about dementia in general. And this is an important statement from a very important book that was published in 1997, indicating that there is so much individual difference with dementia. When you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia. People vary by the age at which it started, the severity of the symptoms, the types of symptoms. Some types of dementia do not begin with memory loss. They might start with problems with language or problems with social behavior. So it's complex, and we need to keep in mind that every person is themselves. They're different. They have different family support systems. They live in communities with different types of support, etc. So we need to keep that in mind. So why should we care about all this? Well, I think you probably know that this is why, one reason why we should care, because of the aging of our population. This is a very simple graph. And what you should pay attention to is that darker teal color that expands as we move to 2050, the middle of the 21st century. You can see that that age group of 75 to 84 is increasing relative to other ages. And we know that the most well-documented risk factor for Alzheimer's and other dementias is age. So when we think about this aging of our population, we need to think about the potential for more people experiencing some type of dementia. I did a little research on your county, and I came up with this information. What I did was I used the 2020 census information, and you can go into it and you can look at the numbers of people in different age groups. So I did that for your county. And there are about 442 people between ages 65 and 74 that may have some type of Alzheimer's disease or other dementia. And I took that percentage from an article published in 2020. And basically, I just did the math of multiplying the number of people in that age group by the percentage that was indicated in that article. And I came up with these numbers of 442, 504 in the ages 75 to 84, and 85 plus about 441, meaning that you have over 1,000 people in your county who potentially have some type of dementia. So think about that and think about how it's going to look in coming years, because we have no magic cure for any of these types of dementia. Well, this story about possibly over 1,000 people just in your one county alone causes a lot of fear. And we know that people fear dementia more than cancer, heart disease, diabetes, or stroke. And that's a study that was done in 2011, but it has been confirmed in many other studies. And that fear, plus a lack of knowledge, leads to stigma. Stigma that we want to avoid people who have this designation of some type of dementia. And so dementia has been called a disease of exclusion, a disease of exclusion from our communities, sometimes even from families. I want to give you two quotes that I gathered in some research that I did in Northeast Wisconsin when I drove around and interviewed people in their homes who were living with dementia and caring for people with dementia. This first one comes from a woman who developed a type of dementia in her middle years. So she was about 52 when she was diagnosed with a type of dementia. And she had to leave a very high professional job at one of our big companies. And this is what she told me. She said people didn't want to talk to her about her diagnosis, but they wouldn't mind asking me about having the flu. So it was fearful and stigmatized to talk about her diagnosis, but if she had the flu, they'd ask her how she was doing, but not how she was doing with the dementia. This next quote comes from a woman who is caring for her husband, and she's describing an all too common situation. She says her friends have just kind of moved on from us. I don't want to burden people with my troubles. And so she gets more and more isolated as the care partner. And her husband, of course, is more isolated. And we know that social isolation is a risk factor for depression and also dementia. So not only for the people who are aging, but the ones who have some type of dementia, their biggest problems are loneliness, boredom, and helplessness. Loneliness, boredom, and helplessness. Think about how many older adults you know who might fit that description. Thank goodness for Ollie, which helps to drive away loneliness, boredom, and helplessness. But a lot of people feel that and they ask, what can we do about this? And well, maybe because of the fear and the stigma, they just want to hide their heads in the sand, which of course makes it worse. So what I think we need to do is to tell a new story. Tell a new story about dementia-friendly communities, because dementia-friendly communities can find creative ways to drive away, to mitigate the loneliness, the boredom, and the helplessness. Whoops, I'm sorry, I just went too far. How do they do that? How do the dementia-friendly communities do this? Well, they create connections for people. Friendships form in these various programs I'm going to tell you about in a couple minutes. They give people meaningful activities to fight the boredom of every day is just like every other day. And they emphasize what people can do for themselves and for other people. And that's very important. And you're going to hear that in the short videos that I'm going to play for you in a couple minutes. So dementia-friendly communities address loneliness, boredom, and helplessness. And they help to tell a new story about living well with dementia. So these are my three categories of aspirational examples: enjoying nature, but dealing with the risks that might come with it, offering clubs and respite for care partners, and then finally the memory cafes and other community programs, which I'll tell you about is happening in Northeast Wisconsin. My first example is about enjoying nature, and I sure was thinking about you in West Virginia this summer in August when we had memory camp at a gorgeous camp in the North Woods of Wisconsin. It's a camp that is ADA accessible. We've been doing this since 2018. Obviously, we had to take a little time off for the pandemic, but it gives families with somebody having dementia an opportunity to be in a beautiful place with lots of volunteers who understand about dementia. It's intergenerational because grandkids come along, and we do all the wonderful things associated with camp. Is there some risk? Well, there might be, but we try to be careful about that. You can see that we're getting some people on a pontoon here. One person had a walker, but we're very careful to get her onto the pontoon. We don't let anybody get too close to that campfire, but still it's a campfire, so we do need to be careful. This man up here in the upper right spent hours building these beautiful creations from sticks and stones and pine cones. And then we spent a lot of time just looking at the lake. So now I want to show you a video about what inspired my husband and me to start memory camp. So I'm going to stop share. And I'm going to go to the desktop. Hold on, wait a minute. I need to find the desktop. Hold on. Maybe I'm going to go to share. Oh, there we go. And desktop. And sorry, this is taking me a minute. Okay, we're going to hear about Dementia Adventure in England. So just sit back and enjoy this. I think you get the idea there. I'm going to go back to my slides. And I found that you have some beautiful places in your county. This picture up here on the left, I think is from your botanic garden. And when I was talking with Jacina earlier, I heard that you have 4 walks through the botanic garden through the year. And that would be a wonderful place that groups of folks with dementia could go. And then I found these other lovely pictures from your region as well. So just being able to have an organized way of getting out into the natural world is so important. And it can take away some of the loneliness and the boredom and the feelings of helplessness that people with dementia have. So even if you don't have a fancy organization like Dementia Adventure, you can be inspired by them to do for your folks with dementia in your community some of what they're doing in England. Now I have another brief video to show you. This one comes from Australia. And it's about clubs and respite care. So I'm going to show that to you. Give me a minute here. Okay, so this is about an organization in Australia, and I'll just show you a little bit of this video. So I hope that you got some sense of that. I hope you heard her talk about how at that program that they address the loneliness, the boredom, and the helplessness, that they are very much committed to that personhood model, and that they call it a club. And I like that, that they call it a club. In Morgantown, I looked up whether, oh, excuse me, I should make this There we go. I looked up whether you had what are called adult daycare centers, and I really don't like that term. I like club a lot better. But I found 2, and I don't know what they're like. I couldn't really find much information on the internet about them. I hope that they have embraced this idea of person-centered care. I love how in that both videos they talked about risk, and we have to face up to that. But it's different for everybody, and we have to recognize that. But how important it is that we offer these opportunities to mitigate, to reduce feelings of loneliness, boredom, and helplessness. So it's, maybe you can tell me more about these adult day centers. They are very expensive to run. And the one you saw in that video, we could not have anything like that here unless we had a huge grant and lots of sponsorships. But you don't need all that fancy stuff if you have that philosophy of celebrating the personhood of the individual with dementia and encouraging them to help one another and to form relationships and to give them engaging activities to make them feel more alive. And I think that's really possible. And that's really what we're trying to do in the Fox Valley up here in Northeast Wisconsin with our Fox Valley Memory Project. We have a lot of programs here that serve people with dementia and their care partners. And we're happy to share information with anybody who's interested. Our memory cafes are very well attended and very popular. I'll show you a picture from just one memory cafe. A memory cafe doesn't have to take place in an actual cafe. We have a lot that are in libraries. We have them in nature centers, various places in our 4-county region. I looked up West Virginia, and I'm sorry to say I could not find any memory cafes in West Virginia, but it's possible that the memory cafe directory I was looking at has not been updated. So maybe you do have memory cafes, but they are such a good way to start in being a dementia-friendly community, that they offer a time for people with dementia and care partners to just come together for an hour and a half or an hour, 2 hours, however long they want to be there, to enjoy some kind of engaging activity, to create friendship because you see similar people at every memory cafe and you get to know them. You are treated like a full person by the volunteers at the memory cafe. We like to say at memory cafes, you often can't really tell who has dementia and who doesn't, because we're all just being together, enjoying a time of social connection, and we'll have a little coffee and a treat, and it's just a marvelous experience for the individual with dementia and the care partner. We also like to say that we do not require anybody to show their diagnosis. We make it clear that these programs are for folks with dementia, but you don't need to bring a note from your doctor. And we welcome you. This next picture is one of my favorites. It's from a program we do every year in a community called Neenah, Wisconsin. It's on the Fox River, and the Fox River flows into a lake, Lake Winnebago, in Northeast Wisconsin. We team up with high school students and we do fishing. We get permission from our Department of Natural Resources for people who don't have fishing licenses to fish for the day. And with the high school students, they fish. And this woman was so excited about the fish that she and the young man caught that even though she had problems with memory and language, she talked about a fish for several days later. She may not have remembered all the details of the day, but she sure remembered how much fun she had. And so we like to encourage activities like that. Again, it's an example of getting out into the natural world too. Some other things that we do are that we organize outings for people living with dementia. Excuse me. This one was one where we went up to Green Bay. You've probably heard of a certain football team in Green Bay. Well, there is a Green Bay, part of Lake Michigan. First of all, we had lunch together, and then we got on a boat and we went on a tour of the Fox River. It was an opportunity for family members and friends and people with dementia to enjoy a day's outing, something that they probably wouldn't have been able to do without the support of people who had planned the outing, made sure that we had accessible bathrooms, and we didn't have any steep hills for people to climb who you were using walkers or wheelchairs, but just a wonderful day of being together and enjoying the natural world. We like to do these outings about 4 times a year. So that's something that you might think about doing. Here's another example of something that I think is very important, and that is that we do service projects at our memory cafes. This one on the upper right is from a cafe at a library. It was doing a fundraiser, and so we contributed to the fundraiser by making these wreaths that could be sold at the fundraiser, and just had a good time. And the people who were there knew that they were doing something to help others. And remember, it's so important that we retain that sense of being able to help other people, even when we have some type of dementia. The picture on the lower right is from a different memory cafe, and it's one where we had somebody come from our local homeless shelter, and she talked about some of their programs, and then we put together these Santa treats, which were little bags that had hot chocolate, and they had a candy cane in them and other things, and we all worked together to put these treats together that would be given to the children at our homeless shelter. So again, our people feeling like they could do something for others, so important. Here's another example of things that we do with Fox Valley Memory Project. We have a chorus, and we've had this chorus since 2014. We have cool t-shirts, as you can see, and we have a wonderful time practicing together and then going out and doing performances in the community. And that's a type of education, because it's showing that people with dementia can bring joy to our lives. And in this case, through their singing. We sing songs that you may be surprised by. We have a program, well, we have 2 programs coming up in early October where we're singing With a Little Help from Our Friends by the Beatles. We're singing Life is a Cabaret. We're singing lots of songs that you might be surprised that older adults with dementia would enjoy singing. But we do that, and it shows the community what we're capable of. This picture down on the lower right is a picture from a program that we did with middle school students. Our chorus sang, and then we teamed up with the middle school students to to draw pictures of one another. And that was a form of education because the students' parents were there and they could see how much fun we were having. And that's a way of indicating that with community support, it is possible to live well with dementia. This last picture down on the right-hand side of your screen shows us at a big event that we did with drumming. And so we actually made some drums at some of our memory cafes. We included people living in memory care, so we brought them from, long-term care, but they had all learned a song with a rhythm on their drums. We had about 150 people in a big room to hear these different examples of drumming from people living with dementia. And I think that the community folks who attended were rather surprised at how much fun we had. And I think you can see that on people's faces there. So these are giving you some examples of things that can be done. The ones we do with Fox Valley Memory Project are not as elaborate as taking folks out on sailboats or, we don't have a fancy club like they have in Australia, but at the bottom of all of these programs is this idea that we will reduce the stigma and we will eliminate as much as possible the loneliness and the boredom and the helplessness that too many people feel. So here's my last slide before we open it up for questions. Whoops, I lost it. Hold on. Oh, we'll have to move through quickly. Sorry about that. This is my last slide. This comes from a book that I wrote. It was published last year. And I just so strongly believe this statement. This was the last sentence in my book, that when we make communities good for people living with dementia, we make them good for everyone. So that's my final word for you. I'm going to stop sharing now and see what kinds of questions you might have. Are we there? Hello?
Yes, we are. So if anybody has questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question. Do you guys have any questions? Anybody?
I'll kick off with a question, Dr. McFadden. So how did you actually get involved from the beginning in terms of volunteers? There must be some resources that you have to use. I'm just curious how you turn the switch on. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's kind of a long story. So I taught in a psychology department for a long time. And I like to say that I have been teaching about aging since I was a brunette. So that means I started teaching about aging and then when I was in my 20s and 30s. I'm not sure how I had the audacity to do that, but I did. And in the 90s, very much inspired by Tom Kitwood, that book that I noted was published in 1997, I was inspired to pay more attention to dementia, because I noticed that at my gerontology meetings, there was a split, there was a separation. We'd had a lot of programs at these meetings for older adults who were living well. We used to use that term successful aging, which I don't like very much, but that was a term that was used. So there were lots of programs for those folks, older people who were still active in their communities, et cetera. And then there were the programs for the people living with dementia. And I thought that's really not a very good situation, that we need to talk about people living with dementia in our communities. And so I vowed at the end of the 90s and into the 2000s that anytime I would do research or write a paper or a book chapter or a book, I would include people with dementia. And so I actually came across some information about memory cafes in England, because that's where they started in 2011. Somehow or other, I talked my husband into going to England and driving 860 miles around England. We visited memory cafes. We went to no tourist spots in England. I never saw Big Ben, but we saw a lot of church basements because we were visiting memory cafes. And I had written to people ahead of time, and they were so hospitable. They invited us to stay in their homes. They didn't know us at all, but come stay with us, and then you can come to our memory cafe, because that idea of hospitality is so ingrained into memory cafes. So after the driving around England and visiting these memory cafes, we came home. We got some grants, some planning grants, and I would urge you to think about planning grants. Not a lot of money. We had a community breakfast where we served scrambled eggs and toast to people in the community. And we said, come and help us think about how we could live better with dementia in our community. So we deliberately invited people living with dementia, plus community leaders like the head of the United Way and head of other nonprofits in the community. So we did this planning grant, and that really identified issues in the community that enabled us to then go back to the community foundation. You must have community foundations in West Virginia, and to make a case for why they should support us in starting these programs. And so they did support us with a 3-year grant, and that enabled us to begin a couple of memory cafes. And we started slowly, but then it grew, and we got more grants and more support from the community. And here we are today. So if you poke around our website, you'll see a lot of things that we're doing. I hope that answers some of your question, Stan. Thank you.
I have a couple questions from chat, and then we'll go to is it Colleen Murray? Okay. So the questions in chat are, we'll get to this one, asking about adult daycares in Morgantown. So we'll do a little research on that for you. How does one differentiate dementia from common forgetfulness when it comes to aging?
Do we have another hour?
So maybe a brief thoughts on that.
The best way to describe it is, of course, we all forget. But if it is interfering with our ability to run our daily lives, remember that was my basic definition of dementia, right? It prevents us from living our daily lives as we'd like to. So if it's preventing that, and if the forgetting is getting worse, if we notice that we're having more and more trouble, that's the easiest way for me to differentiate it. Yes, we all forget. We all walk into a room and say, why am I here? But if it's happening more, and if it seems to be getting worse, if we're now not able to do the things we've always done, like add and subtract in our checkbooks, or if we get lost driving to familiar places, or I always use the example of, I've been making the same cornbread recipe for 50 years. I have it memorized, but when the day comes and I can't do that, that's a change that I should pay attention to. So, it is complicated, but that's my easiest answer.
Sure. Okay. Well, the one other, and then we'll go to the people online who have some questions. How do you fund the memory cafes? Actually, I would ask the question as well.
Well, we fund them. We got those initial grants from the Community Foundation. I also went to the local Rotary Club because it was Rotary clubs in England that had a lot to do with starting the memory cafes there. So I said to the Rotary clubs that were local, I said, you know, your brothers and sisters in England are doing this. Wouldn't you like to do it too? And they gave us $5,000. So we gave a lot of talks to service organizations. My husband and I went to service organizations and churches and businesses and just spreading the word about what this was all about. Then we became a sponsored program for United Way. We got some other grants. We've now received, if you go to our website, we've gotten almost $1 million from an ACL grant. That's a federal grant, Administration on Community Living. But we started off very small. We had one half-time person who helped us start the memory cafes. So it is possible to do it on a shoestring.
Okay, so Marie, I believe you were first.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was interested in seeing Parkinson's listed as a form of dementia. Could you just speak at least briefly to that relationship, please?
Yes, it's complicated. There are some individuals with Parkinson's who also have dementia, as I've described it broadly. So we talk about Parkinson's disease dementia. Not everyone who has Parkinson's is going to develop dementia. So that's really important to keep in mind. And you need a good neurologist who understands really a lot about Parkinson's to be able to guide a person and prescribe medications for the Parkinson's if necessary. There is another type of dementia called Lewy body disease that is sometimes associated with Parkinson's symptoms. So Lewy body, which I hope some of you have heard of, is something that may not start with memory problems, but one of the characteristic and troubling symptoms is that people have vivid visual hallucinations. So they see things, they see people in the room, they see animals outside, they see things that are not there. And that's because of what is happening in the brain as a result of this accumulation of a certain protein substance in the brain. And it forms these Lewy bodies. So that is sometimes associated with Parkinson's, but not always. So as I said, it is complicated. You can have Parkinson's without dementia, but sometimes you have a type of dementia with Parkinson's.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Anybody's hand up? Amy? Oh, you're muted.
First of all, I want to say, Dr. McFadden, you're an incredible inspiration. It's been really a pleasure listening to this. I also am interested in studying cognitive decline and dementia, but I'm looking at a completely other end of the spectrum. Actually, I study suicidal behavior. And of course, what we found is that dementia-related anxiety is related to suicidal ideation. We also know lots of people who respond to surveys saying that, if they got dementia, they'd think about suicide. People use it as the term rational suicide, often cite having dementia. So I love your approach of sort of not giving up on people and seeing them as human beings while they're alive. One question I have is, do you see it as scalable? Are we going to get to the point someday where every community has one or more senior centers that offer this kind of approach, this kind of service? Is it feasible even?
Well,
what are your thoughts?
You've got a lot packed into that question.
I know, sorry.
I'll start with the last one first and say, I hope that we could have these, senior centers. And I think a lot of communities are renaming them because baby boomers might not want to be called seniors. I'm not sure. They haven't decided what they want to be called as they get older. But certainly would like to see that. Of course, the pandemic has had a big effect on senior centers all over the country. As I said before, the day centers are expensive, but so important for respite for the care partner. Being a care partner is very challenging, and we are not going to be able to build memory care communities. You know, these are popping up like mushrooms in our region. I don't know about yours, but around here, every farm field that gets sold all of a sudden 9 months later seems to have a memory care on it. But we're not going to be able to build enough of them. So we need to have these community programs. And I think it's a grassroots effort that can happen. There's a lot of guidance for developing these community programs out there, and I could help you identify some of that. But it is going to be needed. I mean, we know we are living in a time with more people growing older, and there are no magic fixes for this. So we're going to have to face up to it. So that's my answer to your last question. The answer about suicide is one that really concerns me. I just feel like we have so strongly reinforced this doom and gloom image, this dark narrative about dementia. And frankly, some of that has come from the Alzheimer's Association, I hate to say, because in order to raise money for research, very often the message that they give is a fear message. Okay, help us cure dementia by 2025, give us money because this is such a terrible situation. And so that reinforces the stigma and the hopelessness that people have about dementia, and that raises the risk of suicide. And we know that it's already happening. I have, unfortunately, lots of information about that. I am part of a planning organization that is putting together a conference this summer. It's going to be in Waterloo, Ontario, and I sent the information to Julie yesterday, and I'd be glad to, maybe I'll send it to you, Jacina, and you could distribute it, because there's going to be an opportunity for a hybrid participation in this conference. So it's an international conference on aging and spirituality. And it's people from Australia and England and Canada and the US and Norway and Singapore and all over, who are coming together to talk about a new vision for aging. But one of the issues that we are going to be addressing is dying and death. We're going to be talking about palliative care. The Canadians, they have medical assistance in dying now. They call it the MAID program. And they're very concerned about this. So one of our sessions is going to be addressing this, because we don't have easy answers yet. I mean, my perspective is we need to have our communities be inclusive and showing that it is possible to retain joy and meaning despite this very, very challenging condition.
Julie, you had your hand up. Yeah.
I did, and I'll try to make it brief. Hi, Susan, good to see you.
Hi.
In terms of taking folks on boat trips and camping, what kind of support pragmatically, like how many persons does that take? I can't imagine camping under the best of circumstances.
Right. Well, we weren't in tents,
Okay.
sleeping on the ground. We were at a camp that had been upgraded about a decade ago to be ADA accessible. So some of the, every family got their own unit, which had bedrooms, it had a living area, it had a full bathroom and an extra sink. Some of the units had walk-in showers for people with walkers and wheelchairs. And we had pathways where you could use the walker easily. We had a golf cart that drove people around, etc. So, you know, this is a camp that was doing a lot of work with children with autism. So if you've got special camps run by Easter Seals or whatever, they might be open to something like our memory camp. To answer your question, we have more volunteers than we can use. People want to volunteer for this. It's only 3 nights and 2 full days, which we have found to be just enough time. We assign a volunteer to every family, and we just all get along as fellow campers, having a good time together.
Oh, thank you. Excellent.
Anybody else?
I just had one other question, and that is, will this podcast, Susan, be available at some point? I have friends who are dealing with a lot of these issues that I would really very much like for them to see this. So is it going to be available after this is over?
Well, I see it's being recorded, so Jacina?
Yes, we will make that available.
Okay.
Yeah. So I did have a question from some of our members who are here in Classroom A. Curious about, is there a connection between PTSD early in life and dementia?
I think that's one that is open for research. And so I don't have a definitive answer for that. You know, there are risk factors for dementia that are modifiable. So if we could treat the PTSD, that would be a good thing, regardless of whether it's associated with dementia. But if depression is associated with it, we know that that's a modifiable risk factor for dementia because depression is treatable. We certainly want people to avoid head injuries anytime in life. Because we've got a lot of evidence now accumulating that can be a risk factor for dementia. So wear your helmets, you know, when biking or riding a motorcycle or whatever. I think depending on what caused the PTSD, you know, I think that is part of the equation also, but I would not say that there's a definitive connection.
Okay. Are there any other questions from anyone? I'm going to pop back over to A and make sure they're all good. But if anybody else has a question, feel free to speak up and I'll be right back.
Can you hear me? I don't know if you can.
I can.
Okay. I'm Colleen, and I have a neighbor who has Alzheimer's. And I have noticed that she has carers in. I have a carer almost all the time. I've noticed that her speech has gone down. She finds it very hard to put a sentence of any kind together. And I asked her the other day if she watches TV. And she says, oh, no, just waving her hands as in a no sign. And I remembered the movie years ago that was made called Iris. It was about Iris Murdoch, probably 30 years ago. She was an author. And one of the things that her husband recorded about her was that she liked, toward the end, to watch the Teletubbies. I don't know if you've ever watched the Teletubbies, but I thought maybe it would be good to suggest to her carer that sometimes they put on some children's programming, because I feel like she needs more verbal stimulation, but maybe at a level she can comprehend. I don't know. Am I on the right track?
It might be possible. As I said, everybody is different. But I have heard about people doing this. One of the things that I think makes people resist doing something like that is that you say, well, I don't want to infantilize the person. I don't want to treat this person as if they are a child.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if watching the Teletubbies gives a person joy, if they laugh and they sing and well, then why not?
Why not?
But everybody is going to be different. So it's worth a try, I think.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we did have a couple other questions along the lines of curiosity about and worrying about the possibilities of the onset of a kind of dementia. Do any of them tend to run in families that you're aware of? And is a risk factor living alone?
Okay, those are two big questions.
Yeah, they are very big questions.
There is a rare type of Alzheimer's disease that is familial. So we have identified the genes that are associated with that. The onset can come in when people are in their 30s or 40s. So it's rare, but it happens and it runs in families. But most people who have some type of Alzheimer's disease, they may have one parent who has passed some genes on to them, so they may be at greater risk. If two parents have those genes, they might be at even more greater risk, but it's not guaranteed. So we like to say that what's good for the heart is good for the brain, so that we encourage people to get exercise, to eat a healthy diet, and then for your last issue in terms of loneliness and isolation is to be with friends, is to stay socially connected. So those are very important activities that we should maintain throughout life. Another thing that we are certainly learning a lot more about is the fact that there are risks for dementia that begin in childhood. Extreme poverty, lack of health care, lack of education, a very disturbing family situation, etc. Those kinds of things may set a person up for other experiences in adulthood that can be risk factors for dementia. So really, we need to be thinking about dementia across the lifespan. I was at a conference in Europe one time when the speaker got up and said, we think about dementia as being for old people, but we really should describe it as being a middle-aged problem. And of course, that got everybody's attention because we now know that some types of Alzheimer's disease start like 10 to 15 years before symptoms emerge. So I used to tell my students, I'd get up in front of my classes and I'd say to my students, I could have Alzheimer's disease, which of course was upsetting to them because I was giving them grades. But the reason I said that is because we now know that changes are taking place in the brain before the symptoms emerge. So there's a ton of research now going into seeing whether we can stop the progression of those symptoms before the symptoms emerge. In other words, we can do upstream interventions, is what it's called. Now, there are a lot of failed drugs out there that have not done that, but that's what a lot of people are hoping for.
Okay. Any other? Well, it brings to mind lifelong learning, starting lifelong learning even
Absolutely.
earlier,
Yes,
and the
yes.
Nun study from years ago that that was so important to upholding lifelong learning is keeping you
Absolutely.
engaged. So absolutely.
Yes.
Somebody did ask about memory cafes, if there are any in Morgantown. There are none in the state of West Virginia, as far as I know.
I know.
don't
I
know if-
looked on the Memory Cafe
Yeah.
directory and there were none.
It's something that I, about a year ago, I started researching just a little bit when I ran across the idea of it and thought it would be interesting to see if Ollie or WVU could start one. So maybe Julie and Amy, maybe we can talk and see if we want to figure out how we could start one here in Morgantown or somewhere in
Well,
West Virginia.
if you are interested, I can point you to a whole lot of resources. And it's just fabulous that you have this connection with the university. There's a big group of memory cafes in Massachusetts, and they've put out a lot of really helpful, informative documents on how to start memory cafes. And they have a really nice, at least in the Boston area, really nice connection with Brandeis University. And so one of the sororities at Brandeis has a big emphasis on service. And so the women in these sororities have volunteered at the memory cafes. And I have found that my students love this work. You know, college students want to do meaningful things. Being at a memory cafe is not only meaningful, but it's a lot of fun.
And I can see it be, as a caregiver myself, I can see it being a great resource for caregivers.
Absolutely.
To help caregivers stay a little less stressed and to stay healthy by having the support that they provide. Absolutely.
Let me know if you want to do this.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Otherwise, we will wrap up for the day. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And I want to say thank you to Julie as part of the IGALS committee for recommending Susan to us. This has been wonderful. Stan, did you have any?
Thank you, Michelle, for the tech help.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
Yeah, of course, we're all virtual, but I will join in thanking and wishing you all the best ahead and continued enjoyment in your work and recreation. And I want to again thank everyone for participating this afternoon, and have a glorious day and week ahead. Thank you for joining us.